rights have no ontological status. They do not exist in any sense. They are not discoverable. And I think Varsity may or may not push back against that position. And then we're going to discover we're going to discuss what exactly the use value of said rights is in our society. Um, Varsity, would you like to give an outline of your position, or would you like me to start off?
Um, I would like if you started. I feel like,
Sure.
yeah, that would be.
Yeah. So, my position is one that rights as a concept has no ontological basis. I don't think that they exist. There's nothing that we can discover in the human psyche, in the human I guess condition, in the human nature. In any sense, is there rights that we can discover about ourselves and make any kind of deductive arguments from these premises about human nature to the conclusion that we have rights. I don't think that's possible. And two, I think that rights are a very useful concept um, in the sense that they help us bring about moral outcomes that we want. And I do think there are objective moral outcomes, but I do not think that they take the form of these kind of sacrosanct rights that we cannot infringe upon. But the use value is that they can bring about things that we do want in some sense. Varsity, what do you think in opposition or in agreement to that position?
Um, I think I am fine with dispensing with the ontological um, status of rights. I think ultimately I'm agnostic about that question, but as a consequence, if I'm going to be agnostic, then that's what I have to be okay if somebody wants to take it away. Otherwise that would call into question how agnostic I actually am. I think the issue that I have is where we get to the point where we're saying that we can't even make an argument, a coherent argument for something that we might use the word rights to refer to. That would be the main thing that I have an issue with at this moment.
Okay. Do you want to start with that then? Like, how would you characterize that disagreement?
Um, how would I characterize the disagreement?
Yeah, because you're saying like we would need some criterion to discuss rights in some way. Like, what do you think that criterion is?
Um, well, let me answer the first question, I guess, as far as characterizing the disagreement. I think the disagreement is, and I don't know that you're necessarily saying it follows from the fact that they have no ontological status, that we can't make any arguments about them. I don't think that's exactly what you're saying, um, which I would agree with if that's the case. Is that right, or is that what you're saying?
No, I think we can. I would say that um we can make arguments about rights because I think they present themselves as a true or false proposition. And I think that also another thing that characterizes rights conversations is that they present themselves as like premises to a conclusion that is prescriptive. We ought to do certain actions because we have these rights as premises.
Hmm. Okay. Um, Let me submit an alternative way of cashing that out. Maybe it's not a huge distinction, maybe it is. I'm just thinking out loud here. Because as I'm typing up some notes that I have, um, I'm writing out this idea that when someone says, I have a right to something, um, there's almost necessarily something else to which they are referring implicitly, which I think maybe bound up in the notion of a right is this idea that a right is something you have by virtue of some other factor. Like there's no, you have this right because you have this right. There might be like, and this is where we get notions like so-called human rights. What does that convey? That conveys rights that you have by virtue of being human. I don't think that's unique to the notion of human rights. I think that's probably bound up in just what rights are in any meaningful sense of the word. We could cash it out as premises, and maybe that's the better way to do it. Maybe it isn't. Another way that we could cash it out is instead of saying that rights are these premises, that rather instead of premises leading us to a conclusion, I guess the way that I kind of visualize it in my head is more of a conditional, where we're talking about not premises and conclusions, but actually only a single premise, which, and a conditional premise. You know, if X, then Y. So when someone says, "I have a right to," uh, I have a right to exist. Maybe I want to say that's a human right. Um, I'm just spitballing here. What if we peel that back one layer? We can say, okay, they're saying that by virtue of being human, I have a right to exist. We peel that back another layer. We're seeing if I am human, then I have the right to exist. Maybe this is just a semantic distinction. I would be interested to hear what your thoughts are. Do you think that there are different avenues that open up by treating it as a conditional, like in rights are the consequent of some other antecedent? Or do you think it's really important that we talk about it in terms of premises leading to some conclusion?
Well, so I think we needed to talk about what we mean when we're talking about rights as opposed to these kind of moral premises, right? So I think when we look at rights, there's two components that people generally talk about. And I know you have some issues with that word generally, but we can maybe get to that later and first maybe
I'll try to behave myself. I
yeah.
promise.
And I promise you I will get to that. But maybe let's try to characterize it in some way that we can jump off of first. So I
Sure.
think right starts with the premise that there is something um, called human well-being or flourishing that we can make descriptive statements about, right? Like something X produces well-being for humans. And then the right part is saying that because I recognize that it is necessary for this X property to bring about well-being, then we ought to recognize that for every single person, they have that um they have the uh claim to X, right? So my issue is with the second part of that claim. I'm fine with the descriptive claim that there is something called human well-being that is discoverable in some sense. I don't know if we will know it per se, but I think that it is discoverable. But that ought claim that we ought to respect that is where I think we go wrong. And I think the problem with that is because the notion of rights is individualistic by its very nature. And so it promotes all these various conceptions of well-being, and so, because of that, no right claim is going to be um, universally generalizable in the way that proponents want it to be.
Okay. Um, let me take let me try and form a question for each of those things. I think there's like two or three things that come up for me there.
Sure.
Um, so you say like X produces well-being, and because X is necessary for well-being, people have a claim to X. In other words, we ought to respect their X, their
Well,
ability to X, right? Would that be accurate?
I would say their right to X, their right to pursue X. Yes.
Okay.
I would think that is the standard conception.
Sure. Um, so you take issue with the consequent there. That I guess so. That was the first question. I don't necessarily have an objection to it. I think I'm just genuinely looking for clarity, so I understand. Like, I guess how how do you go about challenging that conditional? Like, because you say you accept the antecedent that there is some X which is necessary for well-being, and this notion of well-being might be something we could discover, even if we don't have absolute certainty about it. Um, but from this premise or this antecedent, you don't agree that it's a legitimate move to say that people have a claim to the right to pursue that which is necessary for their well-being. So I guess what I'm asking is if you think
Yeah, the problem is the
you
ought.
get what I'm coming at, yeah.
Yeah, the problem is the ought, because like well-being is something that's grounded in, I guess we would say physicality or well-being in some sense. So like I don't want to make I don't want to make the claim that we can have like direct access to that. I don't think we'd have direct access to that, but I think it is something that we can refine and study and understand. And I think that that second claim that we ought to respect that right, well, that's dicey to me because I don't think that you can make that leap. I think you're adding something new, this concept of a right, to that first position. But I think people that defend rights want to put them together as kind of this synthetic, logical truth.
Okay, so two questions there. Let me start with the second one, actually. That's probably a better one to start with. Um, so you think that well-being is grounded in physicality, but this ought or this notion of right is not grounded in physicality.
No, I do not think it is. In fact, I think that the way that it is talked about is generally as a deductive truth from certain premises about well-being, and I don't think you can make those deductive arguments because I think the premises that you're making are going to be empirical and not deductive, in fact. And so I don't think like your best recourse is going to be a like a very weak inductive argument.
Okay, so my second question then, um, with that in
Oh,
mind, is
so real quick, can I just clarify? Is like I think it's a problem of
hmm?
conceptualization. I think people are conceptualizing rights in the wrong way. They think they're doing one thing, but they're actually doing something else.
Okay, that's like one of my favorite genres of philosophical objections, which, yeah, um, that's why I like Marx, where he's like, "Oh, you think you're so materialist, but you're actually just an idealist in disguise," like that kind of thing. I love that.
Right.
Um, so I guess what I was that's helpful. But I guess what I was going to ask is, do you think it's possible that when someone is talking in terms of these oughts and rights, that maybe what they're saying ultimately, if you pressed them on it, that ultimately whatever they are trying to say could just reduce down to precisely this idea that there is some well-being thing which is grounded in physicality? Like, is that possible?
Yeah, your nature as a physical being, a human being. There might even be some mental components. I don't want to dismiss them, but I would say like for the most part, those would even manifest themselves in physical ways, like through like the agent saying what they want, right? Like there would be a way to actualize that. I don't think that the kind of deductive part of that we can derive an ought from that is um logically substantiated. In fact, I think it might even you could make it internally consistent, but you could not make it consistent with reality. You would have to use an inductive argument to do that.
Well, maybe this is maybe whether or not I realize it or not, maybe that was why I'm drawn to sketching it out in terms of a conditional rather than a premise conclusion. Because in that way, we're just looking at a single premise where we're observing some relationship um, between a condition, which it sounds like on your view would be observable. Like if this well-being thing, if something like human well-being is grounded in physicality, um, and this X, something is which is necessary for well-being, I presume would also be something that's grounded in physicality. Um, that provided that those conditions are met, then whether or not we want to, even if we want to not commit to the ontological reality of oughts, which I think is fine, I guess I don't see the huge problem with talking in those terms in spite of that. Um, and maybe
Talking
that's where I'm misunderstanding.
I mean, I think that there's use value to rights. Right now I'm talking about the ontological status of them, I guess, solely. So I'm saying like I don't think they exist. Like you're not going to look into a human mind and find a right. You're not going to um start with a premise that like there's no a priori truth about rights. Like rights to me are fundamentally contradictory because they you cannot go from these statements about what is good for humanity, the well-being for humanity, to an ought statement that you ought to respect that in other people. I just don't think that's possible. So I think that this is where morality comes in. And I think morality can help to make those kind of claims and like social structures and language, um, like composition, laws, like those things can help elucidate those facts. But I don't think you're going to find that in the concept of rights. So I think rights are basically they're useful fictions.
So you say you're not going to find in a human being something like a right. I
They
think
don't
I'm
have an
probably with you,
yeah, they don't have
right?
an ontological existence. They're not real. But
Okay.
I think they might
But
be
you
useful.
would but you would say that you can find the things to which people are usually referring when they use the term right. You can find the things in a human or in the world which are necessary for humans to have or engage in or what have you in
I think
order
right
to experience.
Yeah, I think rights are generally seen as a means to an end. But I think the problem with that is that
What
I
it
need.
that's I don't know that that's really what I was asking.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, go ahead. Say it again.
Um, so you do think that because I know you've said that this X, which is necessary for well-being, and in fact, well-being itself would be grounded in physicality. So it seems like are you also saying that like okay, we can't find in a human being a right, but would you say that we could find in a human being or in the world all of these different things to which people are referring when they use the term right? Like, can we find the
uh,
reference to that
no, I don't
term?
think there's a referent. I don't think that right has a referent because I think it's the ought part of that conditional.
Okay, um let me try to.
You're not gonna find that ought anywhere. I think that there are ways that we can make that ought substantial, but I don't think it's through the concept of rights. And we can get to that in a bit.
Okay, let me just I because I think I am seeing I'm seeing the problem with what I was just saying, I think, and I just want to make sure that I am understanding it correctly. Like, because I'm presuming that when people use the term right, like use a concrete example, um, like when we talk about a right to, I don't know, uh, right to live, I guess. Um, People are not literally when they use the word right in that sense, they are not literally referring to me living. Like me living is something I can that is grounded in physicality, but in fact, when people use the term right, they are referring to something that is still nevertheless an abstraction. Like they are not actually referring to something that is grounded in physicality. Is that right?
Yeah, if you say you have a right to live, you're saying one that living is conducive to human well-being in some sense. That's the first part. And the second part is that we ought to respect that because it's good for me. And so I have to respect that in others in order to avoid being inconsistent. I think that second half is not um, justified. That comes out of nowhere, ex nihilo, right? It's a way to explain the concept of rights. You're not discovering that in anything.
So I think the problem that still remains for me though is you keep switching between talking about rights and talking about oughts. And I think
Well, I'm
this is
saying that
where
rights have two components, right? Rights have they're basing the the premise of the ought on the fact that there is some uh value that you're trying to obtain. I think generally that's well-being or flourishing in some sense. And then the ought comes from, well, how do you obtain it? What is necessary to obtain that? That I think you need both of those to have a right in totality. I think the first is justified, the second is not.
meaning which part do you think is justified?
The first part, that the well-being part or the flourishing part.
Okay, so the point I was trying to make was um that while I'm with you on rights not being grounded in physicality, and that may have some implication for um, how we might how we should use them, um, or if we should use them at all. Um, I think the problem I was trying to bring up to you earlier tonight was when we start talking about oughts not being grounded in physicality. Well, my response is kind of like, well, sure, but we still want to be able to do like ethical philosophy, I'm assuming, right? And
I
having
want to
some
point
notion
out,
of, can I just finish though?
yeah, sorry.
Um, having doing away with oughts, um, I mean, really for any reason, let alone the fact that they can't be grounded in physicality, which I don't know is a good reason for doing away with them. But whatever the reason is, if we want to do away with oughts, that's fine. But we're done with ethics at that point.
No, so I think you're misunderstanding my point, and I think maybe the chat is too, because I'm not a physicalist. I even pointed out that like I think there is mental phenomena that also lead to well-being or flourishing as well. I'm just saying that physicalism, eh, when it, that there are some things that you can prove through physicalism, and we can use that as a starting point. So I think like when I say well-being is at least, right? That's the key, at least. It's at least grounded in physicalism. I know that there is something discoverable that can give me some idea of how that agent is doing, right? As opposed to trying to guess the subjective state. I'm not trying to do that. That's not to say that there isn't some mental state that could also contribute to flourishing. I'm just trying to talk about what we can know, right? So I'm not trying to dismiss that though. I'm not a physicalist. I just want to make that clear.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not paying attention to the chat at all because I can't
Yeah.
multitask.
No, no.
Um,
I'm just saying like I want to address that because I feel like you were questioning a similar thing, and I'm not saying that.
no,
But what I'm saying
no,
is that
I mean,
I don't know where the ought is going to come from if it's not some kind of physical notion, because I know that we can at least ground well-being in that. There might be more to it than that, but we can at least know there's some physical aspect to that, right? And so I'm asking, well, what are we going to ground the ought in? Where is it coming from? I haven't seen a good answer to that. And if you can propose one, like we can discuss that, but I just don't.
well, I think
I
the general understanding is that if we, I mean, maybe the term grounding is not appropriate, but we can keep it for now. I think it's fine. But I think
Mhm.
the general understanding would be that it's grounded in our capacity to develop rational arguments with ought as an operative term.
Towards what though? I mean, because I don't. Ought to
This
me
is, I mean,
is
I'm still kind of, I mean, I really would love a response to that question of how we continue to do ethics if this is our problem with the term ought, that it's not grounded in physicality. In fact, I mean, we might
I
want
think
to do away
we'll come
with a
back to
lot of
that
things
once we
with ought
clarify the
too.
notion of what we're talking about, right? Because I think there's more to it before we get to that, and I'm happy to talk about that.
I don't see how or why I mean, it seems like it's pretty important to your arguments, and it seems like it's a valid question to ask if you
Well,
want to do away with ought.
I don't know if it is important to my argument because I think um
Well, let me just ask you
well,
directly, do you want to do away with oughts or not?
well, I think whether or not rights have ontological status is kind of divorced from my opinion about moral propositions. I think
Well, how
that
so? Because you said that ought is an important
well,
component of
I will grant for you that it may be the case, and I'm happy to talk about moral propositions as well. But I would say that that is divorced from my claim right now, right? That's a
well, it
separate
can't be
issue.
though,
And
but it can't be.
I think that you could make the point that both would have to fall, but that wouldn't make me wrong because right now I'm claiming they don't have an ontological status. I'm claiming that
Yeah,
it is false that there are rights. It might be the case that it's also false that there are morals, but right now I'm focused on that proposition, right? So I don't think
the
it's
reason I'm
fruitful to
only
go into the morals right now because it might be the case that I'm wrong about morals, but right about rights, right? So I think like that's getting us sidetracked from what we're talking about right now.
I don't really think it is because you yourself have said that the ought is a component of the notion of right. So how can it be divorced
Sure,
from?
yeah, but no, I'm saying regardless of what my views of morals are, I still think it would hold true what I'm saying about rights, right? So like we don't need to go into that yet until we get to that.
So you're going back on what you said earlier then about ought being a component of the notion of right.
I'm not going back. I think you're misunderstanding what I'm saying. I'm saying like irregardless of what I think about morality, it can be false that there's an the ought component of rights are false. Like my stance on morals doesn't matter. I could be wrong about them. That could still be true. They're independent.
You understand I'm only bringing up this term and asking you about it because you yourself have used it many, many times. So now you're saying it's not important, then I would ask you why you used it so many times to develop your argument.
I I think you're not understanding what I'm saying, honestly. Because like my argument has not hinged on
No, it
morality
sounds like
in
the
any
problem
way.
is I'm paying attention to what you're saying and I'm
No,
asking you.
my problem is not hinged on morality in any way. I've not appealed to morality in any sense at this point. I'm only talking about an analysis of the concept of rights at this point. We can talk about the morality. I don't like now I'm getting lost as to what we were even talking about to begin with.
Maybe you, I mean,
'Cause I have not appealed to I have not appealed to more I gave you my stance on morals, but I have not appealed to that stance at all.
but you have. You have
No,
said
I have
that.
not. I didn't say that the ontological status of rights is dependent on morality in any way. I have not said that.
Do you believe, yes or no, that oughts are grounded in physicality?
No, I don't.
Right. Okay. I know you don't. I'm just clarifying. Um, why would you bring that up if it's not relevant to the rest of your argument?
What do you mean?
What do I mean?
My argument right now is not about morality. And I like anyone that thinks it's about morality is wrong. I've not brought up morality. I have not related rights to morality. I'm only talking about the ontological status of rights right now. That's it. I gave you my stance on morality, but I have not made that conditional on anything about moral statements at all. There's been no point where I have done that. So I'm very confused why we're bringing that in right now. That is going to come into play when I talk about the use value of rights, but I have not made any claim about like rights being related to morals in any way. There's no like causal logical connection between the two right now. I'm
Is
talking
there
about
a
the
reason that, so is there a reason that when I asked you about the oughts that you refuse to use the word ought and you use the word morality instead? Like, is there a reason for that?
I don't use the word morality instead. I don't like to
But
me
you weren't just using the
an
word morality.
ought statement is not like uh what's the word interchangeable with morality. Those aren't the same thing.
Okay, well, so put yourself in my shoes. I'm asking you about what you think about aughts, and I'm only asking because you've made certain statements about aughts, specifically that they're not grounded in physicality. I'm asking because I think that has some interesting implications that I would want to explore. Um, when I ask you those questions, you don't really use the term ought, you instead use the term morality, which is fine. I just was curious if there was some specific reason.
I don't think that's what I'm
But then can I
doing.
finish? But then,
I
can
think
I finish? But then
no, I
you
mean, I think
then go on to
you're
say that
mischaracterizing the conversation.
what
I mean, why don't we go back to ground zero because I don't want to waste everyone's time. So let's go back. Like we were talking about the status of rights. Are they real or not? I gave you my perspective that I do think that there may be some reason to believe morality is stance independent. I don't think rights are. I don't think rights have any, we don't have any reason to believe rights exist outside of us. However, my reasoning for believing that rights have no reason to exist outside of us has nothing to do with my stance on morality. They're divorced from each other.
Varsity.
I mean, I don't really think it's fair to say that I'm mischaracterizing the conversation. I am quite literally repeating things that both of us have said. And if you would let me finish, the last point I was going to make was that I found it confusing that when I asked you why you kept switching out the term morals or morality for ought, which is
I don't think
fine
I
if you
ever
want to
did
do
that.
that.
I never
You're
did
not
that.
going to let me
And
finish
they
again.
both ought
So
statements can be made within morality, within rights conversations, which I think are like a maybe subset of morality, or they could be made in like practical statements. They could be made in all kinds of situations. Like I don't they're not interchangeable words to me. I if you think that I was making them interchangeably, then I reject that. I think it's
I
silly
don't
to do
mind
that.
if you are, but again, this was the second time you weren't letting me finish, was that I just found it surprising
Because I
that you
reject the
then
fact that
followed
I
it
would
up.
interchange them. So I don't like why go on if I'm saying that I am not doing that. Okay, if I did that, I apologize. I did not mean to do that. I don't think I did that, but no, I didn't.
Well,
I
the
don't believe that.
what
They're
you're
not
saying now
interchangeable.
is resulting from you not letting me finish because you're not responding to anything I'm saying about what you're doing. I'm not making that objection to what you're saying.
Why don't we hold on? I think Josh wants to jump in and moderate. Let's
I
maybe
don't know
see.
if it's like a moderate. I just wanted to clarify. Do you think it would be, was the point you're trying to make, Varsity, some sort of, could it be compared to like the companions and guilt argument? Like you're saying, like rights and morality, if they have like the same sort of ontological profile, we can say they're real in the same sense or whatever. The same way we say things about the other types of normativity. Are you making that kind of argument, Varsity, or am I, or are you just trying to suss out what Nietzsche's saying so far? Can you?
Um, I barely understood any of that. I have no idea what a companion to guilt or whatever is. I've never heard of that.
Oh, it's the argument
I'm
that
not
like
actually making an argument at this point. I think I'm still just waiting for an answer to my question.
I mean,
I
I just
think
don't.
it's the
You're
But
right.
basically,
It's
it's
a
like the
little.
idea that, from what I know, it's the idea that moral morality is not as on is not as it has the same ontological profile as other types of normative statements, like about, I guess, epistemology, for
Um,
example.
I mean, this is like
Sorry if this is
not
no,
really adding
you just get
clarity,
this.
but like this is
Okay.
kind of
Just get
compounding the confusion that we already have over
Yeah.
this
Let's not
okay,
keep
then
misused.
whatever.
that.
Just go on and start reboot again. I guess. Sorry.
I mean,
I just
why don't we reboot? Because I don't need to talk
Or
about
you could just
morality.
answer my question. I don't think it's that
Okay, let's assume
complicated.
no, it's not complicated. In fact, let's just assume that I say no. Morality doesn't exist either. Like I don't think it matters as to whether rights are real or not.
That's not what I was asking. That's
I'll
not the
just say
question
no.
I asked.
No, they don't. They're both
You're asking me, you're answering no to
they're
a
both
question I haven't even asked you.
okay, ask it.
How do we keep doing ethics if we get rid of oughts?
We don't need to. The ethics are false. I will just bite the bullet and say that for so that I can get beyond this because it doesn't matter as to the argument that I'm making right now.
Well, I think it matters a lot, but I do appreciate you at least answering the question. So let's see where it goes. All right, so we're getting rid of ethics. This will be interesting. This will be interesting to. No, I'm that's all I wanted was an answer. So I'm happy.
Okay. All right. So
Now,
ethics don't exist. Let's talk about rights in irregardless of ethics since they don't exist. Why should we believe in rights? I would say rights, the first premise is that there is something, well-being, that we observe and that we understand in some sense because it is maybe imminent to our existence, right? Like we experience it. And then there's the second part that we ought to do certain things that I don't think is validated because I think that it is a notion that is being introduced that is totally unrelated to the first premise.
um, so a couple things come up for me. First is that if we've already done away with ethics, we've already done away with oughts. The question, why should we use the concept of rights, or why shouldn't we, or quite frankly, why we should or shouldn't do anything is no longer a valid question because we've already dismissed oughts, right?
Well, I mean, that may be the case that rights have, because like to me, rights are a means to an end, right? So like you might have a notion of rights that is derived from some sense that is uh maybe not objective. I would grant that. In fact, I would say that you can make that point. Um, it could be a socially constructed thing, but I would say that you could also make the argument that rights are false and ethics are also objective. That's another thing that you can make both of those arguments. I think it would end up being one of those two things. I think it's not dependent on if morality is true or not. Morality uh being objective is not a criteria on if rights are on have ontological status.
Yeah, I mean, just to be clear, I mean, I just like to be consistent. So like it's not like an ideological thing. It's literally just a consistency thing. I try to not waffle between words just to avoid the potential for confusion, or to take the more cynical view, the potential for slipping things in unnoticed. So I'm going to continue using the word oughts like I've been using. Um, I don't know why we keep going back to morality, especially if you think that it's not the same thing. Um,
Well, it's not the
I don't
same
know.
thing. I'm saying that regardless if if moral propositions are false, all false, air theory is true or whatever, um, rights are false. If morality is objective, there are true propositions that we can make about moral properties, then I also think rights are false. I think they're false either way.
Okay.
That's what I've been trying to say.
Well, obviously, rights would be out if
Yeah.
oughts and ethics are out. A lot of things are out,
Yes.
not
I
just
don't think
rights.
you can't conflate oughts with ethics. So, but yeah.
I'm not sure that I am, but if we're doing away with oughts, we are doing away with ethics.
Sure. But if we do away with ethics, we're not doing away with odds.
Oh no, but yeah, definitely not.
Okay, cool. All right. And so I would say that my position is the latter, that there is some objective morality we can discover, but rights are not. Um, it, rights are false.
Okay, this is kind of weird because like
Hmm.
most of like in the beginning, it was you were really emphasizing um, that oughts are not grounded in physicality, I think was the way you put it.
Odds are not
Um,
grounded in physical. I mean, no, I just don't think odds are discoverable. I mean, grounded in physical, like I'm saying that physicality is one condition on which we can discover things. I'm not saying it's the only one. But I don't think, and I'm just saying I only brought up physicality because I think well-being is discovered in that in some sense. So we have at least one way to discover well-being. I think there might be more
Yeah, that's
actually.
fine.
I'm saying that there's
Um,
at least one thing we can point to. I don't think that's the case with aughts. I don't think there's at least one thing we can point to.
yeah, I bring up the thing about oughts not being grounded in physicality because I distinctly remember you saying it, and I was writing it out for my own reference as you were saying it. Um, which you've said it enough times now at this point where I guess I didn't have to write it down. But it seems like you're not. It's it to maybe I'm misunderstanding you, but it sounds like you're kind of going back on that now. Because you're
On what?
saying, well, there is some
On what?
objective morality we can ground in physicality or we can discover in physicality or whatever, but
I
not this kind, the kind I don't like. That's what it
I
sounds like to me. I could be mishearing you, but that's what I'm hearing, or that's what
I
I think
didn't
I'm hearing.
think I no, I don't think you're characterizing what I'm saying in any correct sense. I'm saying that there are
Well, I'm just
properties
repeating
of
back what you're saying. I'm not.
well-being that are they're grounded in at least something, some notion, right? Like well-being is we there are properties of well-being that are physical. I'm not
I
saying
don't think I meant. I don't
that's
think
not the
I talking about
totality of
well-being.
well-being, though. And I think that we can ground that first part that there are things that humans need to have flourishing or well-being. I think that is true. I don't
Well,
think that
why are you talking about? Well, I mean, did you not? I didn't use the phrase well-being. I wasn't taking issue with that. We already agree on
no,
that.
but
So I don't know
I
why you're
use the
still
word
defending.
I use the word physicality in that sense.
Right. You used it also when you talked about oughts not being grounded in physicality.
Yeah, they don't have that one condition that well-being has. I don't think they have any conditions. I think they're
Right.
introduced into the
I,
argument
I,
ad
I
hoc
understand.
in order to
I
create like I don't where is the if you can give me a alternate explanation as to where it's coming from in that proposition, I'm open to it. But you're not doing that. You're just really trying to like pick at this word physicality, which I'm saying it's a maybe a sufficient condition to find um well-being, but I don't think it's like the only condition. It's just a sufficient condition.
I mean, I don't think I'm picking at the word physicality. I think I'm picking at the word ought, if I'm picking at anything. And besides, it
Well,
doesn't
then give
matter.
me the give me the alternate explanation then, because frankly, like this is getting annoying. I don't where is the ought coming from? Give me an alternate explanation, and I'm willing to hear it out. I would love to hear it out. Give me the alternate explanation. Where is it coming from?
Well, I mean, my intention wasn't to.
I'm giving you one condition as to where I'm giving you one condition as to where these propositions can come from, and I'm saying that it's not there. So you need to give me a new one if we want to try to figure out where ought's coming from in this equation.
Please let each other finish your sentences.
Um, so, I mean, I just want to pause and just clarify. My intention is not to annoy you.
Well, then
I
answer the
thought
question.
I thought I was asking a pretty valid question, and you answered it, and I thought we were ready to move on, which is we're tossing ethics out the window. We're tossing any system by which we can derive something like a you should or shouldn't do this
Well, we
kind of
don't. No,
conclusion.
I'm saying that. So I think that this isn't the way to go, right? Like,
Oh, I
because
don't think so either. I think ethics is important and
well,
necessary.
but
So I
my
don't
claim
think
is
so
that rights, like my claim is that rights are not real, regardless of whether ethics is like ethical statements are true or false, right? Like I don't think it
either.
matters. It doesn't.
But it's not.
They're not related to each other. Like yes, if
But you
ethics
do
are
think
false, if ethics are false, then rights are false. Yes. If
but
ethics
you
are
do
true,
think
I think that we can still say that the notion of rights is false, I think that's more interesting, honestly, than the way that you're trying to take it.
I'm literally just trying to understand why you're saying on the one hand that it doesn't matter whether or not we can keep ought statements in order to dismiss rights, when in fact,
No, you're conflating
well,
ethics. Like, this is what you've been doing the whole time, is you're conflating the two. I'm saying that, like, the ought part of the ethical statement is separate from whether morality is true or not. Like, I don't know why you keep going back with that.
I don't know why you keep bringing up other terms besides the ones that I'm using. I don't know
I'm
how I
only
can
using them. Morality, ought. We've been using them this whole time. I'm not bringing a new term in.
all right,
Like, no, like you can make an ethical proposition like you ought to maximize pleasure and minimize pain. I don't think that entails a right. I don't like that they're separate questions. Now, yes, it's true that if all ethical statements are false, I think you're right that there wouldn't be a place for rights at all. I agree with that. But I'm saying that ethical statements could be true in some senses. I think there's some ethical systems that are amenable to not having these notions of right. You don't need them because I know that we had ethics before the notion of rights was even created. So I just don't like, to me, that's also like obvious to me, right? Both of those statements are obvious to me. The interesting thing I think is that we're analyzing what a actual like statement about rights is like, and that's what I'm trying to analyze right now. So ethics doesn't even come into the foray. I gave you my answer as to what I think is the nature of ethics earlier, only to clarify what my position is, not to say that it is related to my stance on rights at all. And I like, to me, it's like the conversation has gone so far from what we're trying to talk about that I don't. Yes, we can talk about the morality, and I would love to talk about that, but you're trying to connect it to this ought statement in a way that it's not connected. And I've tried to make that clear, and I don't know what I can do to make that any clearer.
okay. So I just let you go on for quite a while, even though you interrupted me a number of times. Interestingly, each time right before I got back to that question that you don't seem to want to answer. So I just want to point that out because I'm not really interested in being
So I
talked
think the
over.
framing of the question is wrong.
So again, for I don't know how many times, how many different ways I can make you understand that it is not me who is inserting this ought stuff into the discussion. I'm just going
No,
off
that
of
is
what
my
you.
basic, yes, that is my basic argument. I know that that is my argument. Like, you don't have to tell me that is my argument. I know I'm talking about the oughts. That's it. I'm not talking about morality. Yes, it is true that if moral propositions are false, then ought statements are probably out the window too. But I'm not saying that that's the only thing that we can talk about. We can talk about morality being true. Moral statements can be true, but that doesn't necessarily mean that these certain category of statements, rights, right, propositions about rights are false.
Yeah, I mean, you interrupted me again.
Because you're just talking past me at this point. You're not listening to what I'm saying. So I don't know. Like, it's clear that you want to have a different discussion than what I want to have, I guess.
No, that's not an acceptable way to characterize. That's ludicrous. I am beginning with premises that you are providing me and
What premise?
asking you questions
Okay, give
about
it to me.
them. You're interrupting me again.
You're still
Unbelievable.
him. Like, please.
Nope.
Also, we're at roughly the halfway mark, by the way.
To what?
The recording.
We're an hour in.
I think this debate has run its course personally.
Yeah, I mean, do you want to pick this up some other time, or maybe we can take questions from the audience?
Yeah, I think
the
We
better
should.
route to go. Let's do this in an orderly fashion. Why don't you moderate who asks questions?
Sure, I guess. I'll just start from the top of my phone. So what we have Chase. You want to ask a question, Chase? Okay, guess not. Josh?
Can I ask a
There are
question?
people, um, after Quante, there are people that also are asking if they can ask questions in the text channel of
Yeah, I'm just going
the
down.
Full Speech Bubble. So,
I'm sorry, my phone was frozen. I actually did want to just interject, I guess, and
Oh, okay, go ahead.
maybe just push things in a slightly more productive direction. I mean, to my mind, rights is very I wanna like hear I think part of the point here, which is that there's different kinds of normativity and different kinds of ought statements you can make, and morality is or ethics is one variety. In fact, morality, some would argue, is like a particular subsection of ethics. Rights discourse, to my mind, is very connected with issues of jurisprudence and politics. And so maybe like a more productive direction to push the conversation is regardless of what we think about ethics, are there basically truth values? Are there discernible truths about legal rights, vis-a-vis individuals and the state and sovereignty, um, and maybe thinking of it as a sort of legal fiction, but maybe a necessary one for having sort of any community at all, in which we can self-govern.
Yes, I mean, this is the point I've been making the whole time is that, yes, there are different types of normativity, and rights are a separate one from morality, and that is exactly the direction I've been wanting to go the entire time. Thank you.
Okay. Varsity, you have anything to say or?
To the question,
Yeah.
I don't think it was really directed to me.
Okay, no problem. Josh, you're next on the list. And you have anything to ask or add?
no, I think Toasted Bread wanted to ask a question, but I don't know if he still does.
No. Chase basically hit it on the nail. I was gonna go in like a similar direction because like rights basically like has when people like tend to talk about rights, they tend to talk about like the political sense and odd statements. Well,
Okay.
it does like have to deal with ethics, but it doesn't necessarily have to deal with morality.
That's what I'm saying. Yes, that's been my point, and I keep getting brought back to having to defend morality when I'm not even at that point of talking yet. I'm
No, I
saying
wasn't
Okay.
asking you to defend
they are
morality.
divorced from each other. They are divorced from each other.
Yeah, but I wasn't asking you to defend morality, and you know that.
Well, you were.
Okay.
Wait,
Anyway,
okay. Wait, can
next
I ask
question.
one? Wait, can I?
yeah, it's going to keep moving
But
on.
I joined in like sort of late varsity, like to me, not to him. Nietzsche's please don't respond. Like what was like what was like the phrasing of your question?
Wait, are you asking me a question?
Yeah. I was asking like what was the phrasing of your question? Because I joined in kind of late.
I don't know that I really. It doesn't sound like either of us really want to continue that line of questioning. So I don't really want to.
Yeah.
No. To me, I just want to hear your question again because I joined late. You guys don't have to continue the conversation if you don't want to.
Well, I'll answer as long as I'm not going to be interrupted while I'm trying to get to the question.
You won't.
You won't.
Okay. So my question, it stems from what I'm perceiving. I'm perceiving it in the sense of I'm hearing these terms being used, that oughts, like you ought to, you ought not to, etc., are an important component of any notion of rights, which, sure, I agree with that. It sounded like his argument was about, at least in part, that part of the reason we should do away with rights is because we should do away with oughts for various reasons, however you want to phrase it. My question then, coming from what I'm observing, coming from the other side of the discussion, the question that arises for me is, okay, then what do we do with any kind of philosophy that relies on ought statements, that kind of aims at getting to ought statements? Because to me, if we do away with ought statements, well, then we're not going to be doing any kind of philosophy that is aiming at coming up with ought statements.
Yeah, I
That's
wasn't.
quite literally
Oh,
the only question. That's what it comes down to.
I wasn't saying do away with ought statements. I was saying that the ought statement in right statement propositions is what we should do away with in that specific context. That specific context, I don't think that you can derive the ought from the first part, the first premise, right? So I don't, there's, to me, you're talking about something that I'm not saying. I'm not saying we should do away with ought statements at all.
Okay.
Okay, wait. Okay.
But
So you say
can
you
I
want
just make sure that the person who asked the question understood my response? Like, I don't know
yeah,
if I made any sense or.
yeah. No. You were clear. I just because you guys said you didn't want to continue this debate. I was just curious. But yeah, back on mute I go.
Okay, we got some people that are really itching to ask their question. So I'm gonna just let those people go first since they're hounding me. Nico, you go ahead, ask your question.
I am very thankful for that. I'm just asking, and also again, not to pound too much onto NietzscheGuevara. I very much agree with your conception of rights and how they're like not grounded in anything, observable or empirical or whatever. What I'm confused about is that you do argue for a objective morality, and you keep saying that they're completely divorced from one another. Your conception of rights and your conception of morality are divorced from one another. But I'm just wondering how that can be, right? Like, if you've got an objective conception of morality, then you know what is right and what is wrong about certain things, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's objective moralities that came before this notion of rights started, such as virtue ethics, right? You don't need the concept of rights to make these moral systems have like propositions about the world and about human behavior that are true. Like, and to me, that is so trivially true that I don't know why we're even asking that question. Like, we had morality for centuries before we had a notion of rights. Rights is a very new concept to humanity.
Yeah, I do agree. Individual rights are very unique in that. Yeah, I have nothing to say.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Keep moving. Vince, or whatever name you're going by now, Marxist anti-copium, I guess. Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So early on, Varsity even agreed with the notion that rights aren't something that's reified. It's not something that you're going to find in nature in the strict sense, but posited that they could be presented as a conditional, that presuming a certain ethic, that rights could then be constructed from that premise. And it sounds like Nietzsche, you seem to reject that as well. I can't tell why you reject the since then. If you presume an ethic or like at the very least an ethic that would allow for that would need to be implemented, that's something that would be expected to constrain action in any way, would it not be required that you'd either have that and then you would need to have some conception of right, what people can and can't do and when, or you just simply have no implementation, you have no rights?
No, I mean, right is I feel like right is a legal structure, as maybe Chase was getting at earlier. Rights are like a way of normalizing and clarifying and giving authority to someone's claim, right? Like giving some kind of actualization or power to their claim. I don't think you need that for there to be a morality, a notion that things are right or wrong. I think rights are a separate issue from that. And I think that you can have a society that might not have any rights, but still have these very like hard claims to morality. Now, whether that's better or not, I think is a separate discussion. And I would love to get to that discussion. I think we got hung up on this other question about whether rights exist or not, and I don't think that I got to really get into that.
Okay. Rogue Synapse, the anarchist. You are next.
Somebody might want to mute him. Oh,
I did.
Hello, hello, hello. Okay, now I can talk. Okay, so basically I see what you're talking about the sort of objectification of morality, but like wouldn't it be a more accurate position to say that that morality in itself is a construct, which, you know, is informed by the conditions of whatever area the culture was in, which made that morality. But even in that, you know, different areas, different cultures had different moralities. And wouldn't that prove, in a sense, that morality is itself a construct? And from there, it would be obvious that rights are a construct as well.
Well, no, I mean that's a really weak inductive argument to me that just because different people disagree means that the concept's false. That doesn't
I'm
follow
not
to
saying that a concept is. I'm saying that having all these different areas with these different conceptions of morality, that would just negate the idea that any objective morality exists, because we could have two cultures with entirely different notions of what a person is, or property ownership,
I
or
mean, you're making that claim
con-
right now. I don't. You're making a claim that
I am making a I
I
am
don't.
making a claim, but
Okay,
I
it's true.
don't.
Not debating, guys. We're just asking questions.
Well, yeah. So I mean, I don't. I'm not here to argue about objective morality. I mean, no, I don't like. No, that's. I think if
Well, would you
relativities,
agree?
if relativity disprove morality, we wouldn't still be talking about it. Like to me, that is like a very weak the argument for. In fact, I think if we talk about moral error theory, you need two propositions. You need the relativity argument, and you need like the queer theory. You need this additional idea that moral propositions aren't like other propositions in order to dismiss them. But just the fact that like different people like have different notions of morality, I just it's not enough to like it's just a weak inductive argument. You're just saying like okay, that doesn't just because different people have different ideas doesn't mean that there is no objective morality. It just means they might all be wrong. They might all be wrong. Some of them might be wrong. Some of them might be right. Like there's some overlap in moralities. You can make an inductive argument in the opposite sense that there's enough argument or sorry, enough overlap to show that some people agree, right? So there might be an objective morality. Like these kind of arguments are silly to me. They're
Okay.
anecdotal. All right,
Okay.
let's move on.
I hope you ask your question, Rob. Uh,
It's okay. It's just more that rights in themselves, you say, are invented, right? In that case, would rights not be a construct?
I think they're a construct. It's irrelevant as to whether morality is a construct, though. And I think
I
I've
know, so
established
that's
that
okay.
through the
That
last
we
five
agree that's
questions.
irrelevant, but rights are a construct. Okay, fine. Go
okay.
ahead.
Okay. Next person, Lazy Delivery. Do you have anything you want to ask or say? You're typing. Do you have a mic? Lazy Delivery. Going once, going twice.
I am affirmatively taking a position. I'm looking at the lazy deliveries question. Yes, I don't think rights are real. They have no ontological status. We can't make propositions that are true or false about them. I think to the extent that they are useful, they are social constructs and able to bring about our moral ends. But because rights are generally conceived of as individual sorry, their individual rights is the general conception. They are designed so that everyone can bring about their own sense of well-being, and because of that there's no moral project that they are aiming towards, and so they are self-contradictory. That is my position.
Okay.
Okay.
Was Liberty? Yeah, Liberty. Do you have anything to ask or say? I think you just joined, actually. I guess not. Okay. Lego, do you have anything to say or ask, or you're good? Good. All right. Ne.tree. Sorry if I'm saying it wrong. Any tree. You have anything to say or ask? Guess not. Red Green Marxist, the main man. Do you have anything to say or ask?
Negative.
Okay. And Socialist Union of Britain. Do you have anything to say or ask? Is he typing? No, he's not. I guess not. And then save the best for last. Do you have anything to say or ask? Ari, is that how you say your name? Sorry if I said it wrong.
Carly.
Harley, there you go. Sorry. I know you said you would clear the room, so here's your chance.
Yeah, it's really boring philosophy. Jibble jabble, gibbledy goopy, stuffy. I could formulate it in the form of a question. Honestly, it's really, I thought of it as a claim. And if you're just interested in continuing a conversation about this, I'm willing to discuss it. But if we're just looking to end the recording, it's probably not worth it. So it's up to you, Nietzsche, because it would be directed at you.
Varsity, you had a question from Vince as well too.
Yeah, I was just I'm unmuted, right? Yeah. Yeah, I was just looking at that. If you want to answer Carly's question first, go ahead. That'll give me a chance to look at this.
Yeah, so Carly, what was your question again?
Oh, okay. Well, feel free to dismiss it. If it's the case that we must have some sort of reference when we're engaging in philosophy, and if it's the case that, at least materially speaking, the politic is embodied in material. And we can think of these political relations through these like functions of, let's say, individuals. These functional relations between individuals. And we don't want to say that there's an abstract realm that is validified, right? Because if we do admit that there's an abstract realm that was validified in virtue of its own abstraction, then we can just easily say there's rights. Then I'm wondering how it is that we can have the talk of right, and we have these hypothetical systems of politic that do almost centrally, necessitate these concepts of rights. That,
what
if they're not referring what might initially be to an abstract self-referential form, but instead it's if they're not ultimately refer down to the material relations in these forms of like functions. And that seems to be, maybe this is where I would ask the question, wouldn't that in this case allow for you to say that we do actually have a physical or material manifest referent of right, which is the behavioral functions between the people in the body politic that perpetuate themselves in their endeavor to continue the nation or whatever.
I mean, you rambled a little bit, sorry. But I take your point. I think it's clear that societies have existed without notions of rights, so I reject the idea that like we need rights in any way to bring about social conditions. I think rights are a particular way of embodying something about morality that we use to bring about certain ends, and there's other ways to bring about those ends. I don't think the notion of rights is like unique in its ability to do that. I think it was useful at a time, and I think it came out of a certain conception of human nature, mostly like Hobbesian or like Lockean kind of conceptions, Enlightenment thinking. And I think that that is we've dispensed with that view of human nature, but we have not dispensed with this notion of rights. And I think that's a problem as an artifact. That's my historical analysis of it. And yeah, we can organize society without rights. We've done it before, and we can do it later.
Cool.
Vince, I guess you can go ahead and reword if you want to.
Yeah, if I understood Carly's question, I think it's actually related to mine. I was going to ask Varsity about his position on the conditional earlier, because Nietzsche is confusing me a bit. When I asked the previous question about whether rights could be formulated from a conditional, that a sort of presumptive ethic leads to the need for a concrete implementation, or none, and that will take the form of a right scheme. But now he's saying, well, no, it's a specific conceptual formulation that's historically contingent. I want to maybe, instead of asking that directly, I want to clarify Nietzsche's position. Wouldn't that apply to morality too? Because I'm thinking morality has demonstrably changed, and insofar as you're saying there could be an objective morality, why would it not apply there? Why would it not equally as much apply the same way that you're formulating rights? Well, yeah, people had a particular conception of morality, but it's never been real. It's also been contingent. Could it not also be formulated the same way as rights, that it's not contingent? People misunderstood it, but there is a way to formulate a consistent rights theory, and it's just human fallibility that makes it contingent.
I think there's multiple parts of morality that we can talk about, and I think you're talking about a very specific kind, which is kind of like practical morality, where we actually do the thing. But I think what I think is objective about morality is the values part. What should we value? What are things that are valuable? How do we measure value? I think that's separate, and I don't think you need any practical morality to have a conception of that. I think what is going to be embodied and what's going to be more historically contingent is exactly the part of morality that rights are a part of, which is that kind of practical part. And so to me, those are separate domains, and they have separate like ontological status. They have separate kind of justification that would be involved in making them. So I just wouldn't conflate them.
Okay. I think that was a good answer. And didn't you have a question for Varsity, Vince, or it was just Neats?
Yeah, I did. If I can ask that too, that's all right. So Varsity, my question about discourse ethics, because it's that since then. You said that early, that it was you think rights are. You said that rights could be reasonably formulated if you accept a particular premise. So I wanted to sort of give you an example premise, which is discourse ethics. The idea that, well, the constraints or the rights, if you will, are formulated from this premise that the way that people behave reveals what they might prefer the constraints to be. Quite aside from what's in a philosophical textbook or the way that people are talking about it at a historical point in time. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think so. If I'm understanding you correctly, and discourse ethics is something that I've been trying to wrap my head around more recently. I wouldn't feel comfortable saying that I'm very well versed in it, but from what I've looked into, it seems to match my intuitions about it. It seems to, I like it, I guess. And if I'm understanding your use of the term here correctly, I would say probably, yeah. That might be kind of where I was going with that specific line of argument, where like, well, there's a way we can talk about things and use this term, and you know, as long as we have that, we can at least carry on these conversations, even if we are to say like there's some issue with the concept. Like if we really analyze it closely, we'll find there's something not quite right about it. But maybe I guess I'm at this point I haven't been convinced that there is something so egregious with the concept that we ought to do away with it. Now, two caveats I would put to that. One being that I think the only reason I even had like anything resembling discourse ethics in mind going into this is really only because before the debate, Nietzsche provided me with an article about a particular person who I think both of us are still trying to figure out how to pronounce his name correctly. This guy, Alan Gurwith, is how I'm pronouncing it, who appeals to something similar to that. So I have to give him credit for that. The other caveat I would put is that, you know, maybe we just didn't get to that part of the argument. It wasn't my intention to like literally prevent that from happening. I just don't think we were ready to move on to that part of the argument. But I just wanted to point out that having discussed this with him earlier, I'm pretty confident that he would have something compelling to say in response to that. So, and I would give you, Nietzsche, the opportunity to do that now if you wanted to, too, because I don't know if it sounded like you were trying to get us to that part of the discussion. And I just didn't think we were ready to move on yet. But I mean, if you feel that coming up here, like, you know, please feel free to jump in with that too.
What part of the discussion are we jumping in at?
I guess the discourse ethics question that Vince was asking, I guess sounded like it was more pointing towards like the pragmatic question, you know, how useful is this concept, or what will we need to fix about it if we want to use it?
I mean, to me, rights are useful in that, well, I think I was getting at that too as we were answering the question. I think that they are a way of embodying certain ideas we have about well-being, certain ideas we have about individuality, certain ideas we have about the pursuit of goods, right? I don't know that they are the only way that we can do that, or that the way that we frame them right now is even the best way to do that. Because I think right now they're framed as like these universal, um, kind of beyond condition sort of law-like propositions that I don't think are true of anything. I don't think they point to anything in reality. In fact, I think they're based on antiquated frameworks about how humans work. I think that we could have rights that are more tailored to the specific social conditions and society that we live in, and they might be more fruitful. And I think the other part is that um, I think that the way rights are framed right now, it's very much individual rights. I think that there could be some conception of collective rights that maybe we don't need to totally dispense with individual rights, but I think they could exist side by side. And that might be more fruitful towards actually bringing about morality in general, because I think morality is about people pursuing a common end, and I think individual rights is about people pursuing their own ends. So I think they're contradictory.
Okay. Well, I think if you guys want to go in that direction with the conversation, it might be better to do it another day since the recording bot is about to end, I believe.
No, we have a half an hour. We don't have to go on either.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I would I be able to say something after everyone is done asking their questions?
Questions are
That's
done. Yeah, questions are done. I was just going to open it up for everyone, free for all type of thing. But if you got one last thing to say, go ahead, and then I'll just open it up.
Yeah, I mean, it sounded like, you know, it sounded like from your perspective that the question I was asking wasn't germane to the topic, which I didn't agree with, and I guess I still don't agree with it now. But I guess I would ask what you think of the fact that, I mean, at least several people that asked questions did ask similar ones to the one that I was kind of harping on. I mean, would you at least consider uh, recharacterizing it as something other than an, irrelevant question? Because it clearly seems like it is relevant for at least a few people in here because they asked kind of similar questions that I did.
I think there was a I don't know if it was, I don't want to say it's a obvious misunderstanding, but I think that once I explained it, everyone pretty much understood what I was trying to say. And I think that maybe the line of questioning was leading to that misunderstanding. Because I think there's also people that very clearly and succinctly said exactly what I was saying. So like I wouldn't appeal to the audience in that case.
It's not an appeal, it's just an observation that I heard a couple people ask a similar question. So it
I've
seemed
also
like it was.
heard someone Chase say exactly what I was saying in different
We're
words.
interrupting again. We're riddly and like no.
I'm just saying that I just don't, and like either way, it doesn't cut any way to me. I think my point has been understood by people at this point. Like
Yeah,
morality.
no, I think it has. I agree. I guess for me, maybe my bar for relevancy is lower. My bar for relevancy is if certain people are looking for, or even if at least one person is asking a question, then it seems like
Well,
it's relevant.
all right. I think that maybe even the way that people are reacting is almost proof of point for me because I don't like, again, like morality and rights, two distinct evolutions. Not they have existed before. Morality existed very long before rights ever emerged. There's no reason to link them. I don't like the burden of proof shouldn't even be on the person claiming that. It should be on the person that's trying to say that rights and morality are inextricably linked. Like I don't, to me it's just so obvious, and maybe that's a blind spot of mine that I don't know why I'm having to defend that. Like we should have like got past that right away. Like morality rights came across in the Enlightenment period well after ethics started.
Okay.
So
Okay. And there is a question in the chat by that lazy delivery guy if you want to answer it or not. After you answer that, it's open. Anybody who wants to jump in can jump in. So
here's a question. Isn't it dumb to no, I mean that's a snarky, sarcastic response that
yeah,
doesn't elucidate anything.
that's
No.
exactly what I didn't ask it. So yeah, okay.
Like
Free
no,
for all.
Well, can I frame it then differently, perhaps? Because I
Sure.
think I get what he's gesturing to.
Yeah,
yeah,
go
if
ahead.
you can put it in a way that's not like just dismissive, then yeah, totally.
Yeah, Lego,
Yeah,
you can turn
I-
if you want.
Yeah, so just you were appealing to an alternative ethic of well-being. And when
No,
I
I
hear
wasn't.
that,
Actually, I never actually got into my ethical argument at all. So I don't want people to keep characterizing me as if I have, because I didn't. I never made a claim about morality. I was never appealing to morality. I didn't even get to talk about my morality. So I don't.
I said ethics, and you had earlier said that those can be distinguished.
Yes.
Well,
So I never appealed
maybe I
to
can
it. No.
frame the question because I take your point. I understand that you're not trying to make a moral claim, and I can accept that there can be a categorical distinction between morality and rights. I can understand that. What is hard for me to capture is your argument for it. You were drawing a line between morality and rights, but you were making an argument about historical contingency. I'd asked this before, but when you appeal to here's why rights are invalid. It's because we have these new conceptions. We can appeal to
That's not
this
why I said rights are
alternative
invalid. Sorry.
system.
So I'm not going to answer questions about something I didn't say. So I know people are telling me not to interrupt, but you guys keep putting words in my mouth that I didn't say. One, I never appealed to morality. Two, I did not say that rights are historically contingent. In fact, I gave a deductive analysis of rights as to what they're claiming, and that was my argument against them. The historical analysis was secondary. So like, why are you guys like saying that I'm saying these things that I'm not saying? To me, it's like you're looking to analyze this concept in the way that you view it, and you're foisting it onto me. And that is very not productive as to like trying to look at a new perspective that I am presenting to you.
So Needs, the reason I put it that way is because you responded to my argument to my question. I apologize. My question with that argument. I understand it wasn't what you were saying before. I understand that much. That's why I wanted that clarification, and now you're rejecting it. So I don't understand. I understand that it's not a moral claim. Like, you didn't have to make a moral claim to make the argument that, look, someone saying that this history is evidence that the rights may not have been well formulated, but they're there, and you said, well, it was there, maybe it was right then, whatever, the implementation made sense then, it isn't now. How does that affect the argument the Varsity was gesturing towards, which is the sort of since then, the conditional argument? Could you help clarify that? Why is a particular abstraction favorable to one since then opposed to another?
I think that is a valid.
Why do you feel?
I think the question is valid, right? I'm only getting frustrated when my position's being mischaracterized. But I think, yes, if you want to go down the if then argument route, that's fine, or the conditional argument, that's fine. Maybe give me a little more clarity as to what you think my contradiction is in that regard, and I'm happy to answer that.
If no one else, I want to stop because I know I've said a lot. I'll let someone else pipe in if they want to, but I could expand on that if other people have.
Please do. I mean, I'm seeing people arguing about editing comments, so.
Okay. So, in part, the sense then, like the discourse ethic is just one example of here's what establishes the sense. So, when you responded to me, you had used, at least as an example, the idea that there's this alternative conception of well-being. And I understand that that's not what your argument entirely relies on, but I'm wanting to find out, I'm trying to figure out why you brought it up, given that that's the case.
Why I brought it up?
To establish what your argument is, I'm going to try to repeat it back to you and see if you can correct me.
To derail what you're saying, it's just, I don't want to try to answer a bunch of questions at one time. So maybe ask me about the well-being part first and then go to your next part.
So the well-being, I don't have any specific question about the well-being. What struck me was that it was you presenting an alternative, and you don't need rights to formulate this particular ethic. And I think that's the part that I don't get. If there is any system that would necessarily need to be implemented, and it's based on something, why would rights not be required? Even if you're like, why would well-being as or any other alternative abstraction have more presumptive validity? Like what other basis could there be that doesn't involve rights? Why would that not be the conclusion other than no rights? Like I'd asked earlier, like an antinatalist ethic, for example, might not need any rights.
To me, rights only make sense in the ethical system from which they're framed, right? So like, let's take a utilitarian system. You can make a utilitarian system where the end is to maximize pleasure, minimize pain. You don't ever have to refer to rights in that process. In fact, the only thing that matters is whatever premises get you from